Yurkovich. I'm a senior associate at Ramian Associates, and we have this evening simultaneous interpretation available for those who are interested in Spanish interpretation. Diana, would you like to introduce Jasmine?
Sure. La interpretación en simultáneo para esta reunión se dará en los siguientes idiomas. Español con Jasmine, bajo la opción español. Y por favor, haz clic en el icono Interpretation en tu barra de herramientas para acceder al idioma deseado. Gracias.
Thanks, Diana. And so tonight we're going to have lots of opportunities for questions and answers with the project team. And we will be doing that through two primary ways. You are welcome at any time during the meeting to chat the project team questions that you have, and we'll queue those up for conversation. And then we're actually going to stop at 6 different times during the meeting to allow question and answer. And at that time, if you're interested in asking a question, you may raise your hand with the raise hand function on the Zoom display and get yourself in the queue to ask a question. And we'll go through those questions as we see them through the evening. And with that, I'd like to introduce Rich Garbarino, the mayor of South San Francisco, and tonight he is going to kick off our community meeting this evening. So thanks, and with that, I'll turn it over to Mayor Garbarino.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. This is Mayor Rich Garbarino, and I want to thank you for attending tonight's General Plan Community Meeting, and I appreciate your helping to shape the future of South San Francisco. The General Plan is the city's 20-year strategic plan, and it will guide the direction of our city in the future. Tonight, we will examine a very important element of the plan called the land use map. This map will detail the future physical layout of the city, including locations for such things as housing, parks, retail shops, and industrial buildings. Your input tonight is welcomed and very much appreciated and needed as we finalize the land use map and continue working on our 20-year plan. I look forward to hearing from you tonight and gathering your input. Thank you all for attending, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Garbarino. So with that, I'm going to restart my screen share and with you all. Give me a second. Okay, so once again, my name is Eric Yurkovich, and I'm with Ramian Associates, and we've been working with the city on the general plan update for a little over 18 months now, and I know a lot of you have attended the past meetings, so it's great to see you all back this evening. We are really excited to be back tonight because we really get to bring together a lot of the feedback we heard from the community over July and August this summer about land use and what your vision is for the future of South San Francisco. So tonight I'll kind of be the moderator of the meeting, and I'm going to go through a number of slides, but really what I'm going to do is kind of tell you where we are in the process of the general plan update. We're going to talk about those community meetings that we had over the summer, and talk about what we heard from you all and how we used it in developing the preferred land use alternative for South San Francisco. And then we're going to really kick off and launch a process to receive feedback from you on that preferred land use map. Well, we're calling it a preferred land use map. It's not set yet, so we're here to hear your ideas, to take your comments and take your input on that map this evening, but then also through an online survey, which we'll be launching and be talking about later on this evening. So we're really going to split this evening into kind of these 4 discrete buckets. The first one is what we're doing right now. It's a little bit of a welcome, but then I'm going to provide a kind of an overview presentation, and we're going to have a series of Q&A sessions and polling, live polling that's going to happen throughout. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do that. We're going to do that Q&A and polling 6 times. So while this seems like a lot of time, there's actually quite a lot of time for Q&A and conversation to happen throughout. Then we're going to kind of let everybody start working on the community survey. So we've taken all the information we've heard and developed kind of a preferred alternative worksheet and workbook for you all to kind of look at, review, and to provide us comments on. So we'll spend 20 or so minutes doing that as a group, and you can all work on it individually. And then at the very end of the evening, we're going to come back as a group together, and we're going to kind of talk about what we're seeing in some of those comments, what we've heard from you all tonight as part of the commenting that you've done on that online survey. So tonight we're going to begin with where we are in the general plan update process. This diagram illustrates the planning process kind of from the beginning of the project all the way to the end. Tonight we're really focused here in the center. We're really talking about alternatives, and we're talking about particularly land use alternatives. We met with you all this summer through a series of 7 digital and virtual workshops over the summer, and we're here to kind of take all that information and talk about that kind of preferred land use plan for South San Francisco. One of the things that happened over the summer and through all of our listening sessions that we had done last year, is we heard a lot of really great ideas about policy development and implementation action. This is going to really help. We're really pulling that piece of information together as we launch sort of the next phase of policy development, which will be kind of the core of the general plan itself. So those policies that are about mobility, parks and open space, and social equity. So we're pulling all that together, and we'll start that policy development and implementation ideas starting in the fall and moving into the spring of next year. As I mentioned, we've done a significant amount of community engagement to date, and I know that many of you have been part of all of that engagement throughout the last 12 or 18 months. So in the fall of last year, summer and fall of last year, we held kind of 9 listening sessions around the city where we really tried to hear what the key issues were, what some of the opportunities people saw were, and really what you loved about South San Francisco that you wanted to kind of hold and maintain, not just now, but in 2040, in the future. We took all that information and pulled it together and then had a series of community visioning workshops and pop-up meetings to really hear what your vision was for the future as a community. We took feedback from all that, and then during the pandemic launched an online survey kind of laying out that, articulating the vision, core values, and guiding principles for the general plan, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And then in the summer, we hosted a series of virtual workshops really focused on land use alternatives in South San Francisco. Throughout the process, we've had a number of other meetings, 15 with our Community Advisory Committee, as well as numerous meetings with Planning Commission and City Council as well. So we're really in this part of the process, as I was talking about, around alternatives. So over the summer, we had these 7 meetings, around 3 land use alternatives for South San Francisco, which we talked about at the city scale, but then also at 4 key subareas. So east of 101, Lindenville, downtown, and the El Camino corridor. We tested lots of really interesting policy ideas. So could we create new vibrant neighborhoods in the east of 101 area and in the Lindenville area centered around Colma Creek? Could we intensify the life sciences and biotech east of 101 so that we can kind of maintain and keep a core of industrial warehousing and service spaces within east of 101 in Lindenville? So we took all the feedback from those kind of big picture land use policy questions and really brought them together in the preferred general plan land use map that we're going to be talking about this evening. And then from there, once we get feedback from the community, from Planning Commission and City Council, we're going to then be kind of finalizing that map and moving through the environmental review process, but then also kicking off a process to look at the specific zoning designations that underlie the general plan land use map. And in that conversation, we'll be getting into more detailed conversations about building heights, requirements for parking, requirements for on-site open space, building setbacks. So all of those design standards and guidelines that really shape new development within South San Francisco. And just a reminder about what a general plan land use map is and is not. So the land use map in a general plan really establishes the policy direction for the future of South San Francisco, as Mayor Garbarino pointed out. It's intended to show both the distribution of land uses across the city, as well as the relative intensities of those land uses across South San Francisco. And it really focuses, again, on future growth, your policy for future growth, what you want to see in different areas of South San Francisco across the whole city, and not necessarily on what's there that's existing right now. And just a reminder that the land use element and the land use map itself would be supported by all sorts of other policies and implementation actions, from things like mobility, infrastructure, housing, parks, and open space. So while we're talking specifically about this land use element and the land use map today, it will be supported by all sorts of other elements of the general plan as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what we heard over the summer during our community engagement process around those land use alternatives, and then how we then incorporated that into what I'm presenting to you guys this evening in that preferred alternative workbook. So as I mentioned, we met several times with the community, and we had about 450 what we call touch points with the community. So those are participants who came to those virtual workshops that we held, as well as completed the online surveys that we had, or attended an Ask a Planner session that we hosted weekly during the summer. Most of the participants in those meetings were either from the downtown area, and then they're kind of from an age bracket, sort of 30 to 60 years old. As you can see on the graph, these touch points really overrepresented the white population within South San Francisco and underrepresented the Asian and Latino populations within the city itself. We saw that as we were going through the process. And what we did was we held an extra meeting in downtown, which we did in Spanish with English translation, and then also went out and had a meeting with the Youth Advisory Commission so that we got more young voices within the planning process. So it's not a perfect representation of the community, but we did try and go where we saw those gaps and get feedback from those different groups within South San Francisco. And we heard a lot of really cool and really awesome ideas during that process. We heard a lot about land use, obviously, because that's really the core focus of those conversations. But we heard all these great ideas about creating a cultural arts district, creating, investing in universal pre-K, creating a community center downtown, protecting Old Town residents from gentrification and displacement. We heard a ton of really great ideas from the community. And what we've done is really tried to bring those together. So pull all that information together. So we heard a lot of broad themes about what the city should be like in the future. We heard a lot of specifics on the map preference, like what land uses should be here or there or somewhere else in the city. And then we heard a lot of really specific comments, like we need to put a community center right here. So we took all that information and kind of summarized it and synthesized it into these updated vision and guiding policy sections for the sub-areas within South San Francisco, which we'll be talking about in more detail tonight, and that's the east of 101 area, the Lindenville area, downtown, and El Camino. And then we updated that land use map. So we took all that information about those land use changes and we created that composite preferred land use map for the city. And then we heard a lot of really great ideas about policies and actions that we wanted to capture and bring together. These are things that we're going to study as our team in more detail over the coming months. So these really broke down into kind of 9 broad themes. First of all, we heard a strong desire to maintain industrial in the Lindenville area in the east of 101 area. This is not just about maintaining the legacy of South San Francisco as the industrial city, but also as a way to maintain and keep good paying jobs for South San Francisco residents. We heard a lot about creating new, vibrant, mixed-use residential neighborhoods, both in the east of 101 area near the Caltrain station, but also centered along Coma Creek. It's really thinking about that transformation of Coma Creek into something that's special and unique and can be a place-making feature. We heard not only about building housing in East of 101 in Lyndonville, but about creating a range of housing types for different income levels and different household types, not just in those areas, but across South San Francisco. So in downtown, El Camino, and all of the residential neighborhoods as a whole. In the downtown area specifically, we heard a lot about celebrating the history, culture, arts, and diversity of the area, and really wanted to kind of lift that history and culture of the city up as part of the general plan update. We also heard about a real strong desire to transform Colma Creek into a public amenity. People were interested in making sure that it maintained and improved to make sure that it could hold the stormwater capacity that it needs to keep us safe, but then also create opportunities for social interaction, gathering, as well as physical activity, mobility along that linear corridor that runs all the way from the bay all the way through the heart of South San Francisco. We heard a lot about both maintaining and improving existing open spaces within the city, but also finding new opportunities to add park space around the city, both in those neighborhoods that are park poor, but also those neighborhoods that are new, these new vibrant neighborhoods east of 101 in Lyndonville. Where can we find those opportunities for new parks and open space? And we heard a lot about making sure that we're thinking about the impacts of future growth on residents within the city. So it was really important that we think about things like traffic and noise and air pollution, but also the impacts of development in areas like downtown where there can be gentrification and displacement. And then we heard a lot about the desire to make sure that if we're building east of 101 and in Lyndonville, we think through and start to outline the steps that the city is going to take to address sea level rise, whether they be through landscape measures, whether they be through hardening measures, or other policy and financial mechanisms. And finally, we heard a lot about improving the connectivity of the city. So making sure that east of 101 is knitted into downtown, into Lyndonville, making sure all the neighborhoods that are surrounding the downtown and Lyndonville area knit into downtown from a bike and pedestrian perspective, and then really thinking about mobility along that El Camino corridor, so making it more pedestrian and bike and transit friendly, but then also making sure that people can cross it, that it's permeable, that it's a safe and nice place to walk and bike within the city. So we took those really broad themes and we took that and we started to think about how they apply to the preferred land use plan, or how do they apply to the land use map. And this is just an example of alternative number 3, which we showed back in July and August of this summer. And so what we did was then take those broad themes and then specific comments that we started to get on the alternatives for the El Camino, downtown, Lyndonville, and east of 101 areas. And so we took those and people's sort of preferences, general preferences for alternatives, and in downtown and El Camino, that was alternative 1, and Lyndonville and east of 101, that was more like alternative 3. And then we started to refine and adjust those kind of land use alternatives with all of the comments we started to get, like specific comments about the map, as well as those broad thematic things that we were just talking about. So that we took all of that information, and then that's what kind of we pulled together for the preferred land use plan. And as I mentioned earlier, we heard a lot of really terrific ideas about policy and implementation action for future study. And so we're not focused on all of that tonight, but we're going to have a lot of opportunity to talk about policy development as the general plan process moves into its next phase. And so what we wanted to do is reflect that we heard all these things, sort of kind of capture all that, kind of lift it up and make sure that everyone recognizes that we heard all that stuff and we're going to be bringing it into this next phase of policy development. So we organized all of that into these 7 kind of categories. So land use and placemaking, housing, and mobility, you can see on this slide. So we heard things about creating an arts and cultural master plan, making sure that there was affordable housing production across the city, and making sure that if we add new non-residential development in the east of 101 area, that there's really strong transportation demand management measures that are in place for that new development. We also heard a lot of great ideas around climate change and sustainability, health and equity, economy and education, and public services. And I mentioned some of these before, things like universal pre-K, jobs trainings programs, healthcare and healthy food options, and things like street trees as kind of ideas that people talked about throughout those meetings. So now this is the first of 6 different times which we're going to pause during this presentation so you can stop listening to me talk. If you're interested in asking a question about the process so far or what we heard, there'll be lots of opportunities to talk about the preferred alternative, both at the city scale and in those 4 sub areas I mentioned later, and you'll have opportunities to ask questions then. But if you have questions now about kind of the process and what we heard so far, we'd be happy to take them. Please feel free to chat those questions to us or to raise your hand and ask a question, and we can unmute you.
Also, Eric, before we get started on that, would we be able to poll folks on the demographics? I think we missed that earlier on.
Oh yeah, thanks, and thank you, Diana. Thanks for reminding me. We put these little hexagons on slides for polls, and sometimes I miss them even though they're bright red. But Diana, if you want to, you can launch the demographics poll while people get queued up to ask questions, or if they have questions they want to drop in the chat. So feel free to raise your hand or to chat us questions.
And for those of us who are calling in, you could do *9 to raise your hand.
And that voice in the background is Diana Benitez of Ramey & Associates. Okay, I don't see any hands. We had one question from Ken in the chat that I see, which is, are you going to cover questions that were posted on the Shape SSF presentation? So I think you're referring to the preferred alternative workbook, which has an interactive feature. And so some of those things will come up, I think, in the conversation this evening, but there will be opportunities to, when we do the report back, that can be part of the synthesis of that report back as well.
Eric, another question we got is, would like to know whether the other elements of the general plan will also be discussed, such as open space and sea level rise?
Thanks for the question, Geeta, and good to see you. We will be talking mostly about land use this evening, but we're going to be covering those topics as part of the policy development process. And so we're going to have another round of community meetings really focused on topics like parks and open space, social equity, climate change, and sustainability. So there's a question from Mary about, does the Genentech development fit into the map? Where does the Genentech development fit into the map? East of 101 or Lindenville? It's in the east of 101 area, and the Genentech master plan has a little dashed line around it. So if you're looking at the east of 101 area on the preferred alternative, you'll see a little dashed line around it, and you'll see it later on in the presentation. Jeannie asks, have we set a goal for population growth within the city? We have, as part of the process, when we studied the land use alternatives, we estimated the future growth associated with those land use alternatives in terms of both the number of jobs as well as the number of housing units and the population that is associated with those housing units. I don't have that number in front of me, but I believe in the preferred alternative workbook, you'll see the number of housing units and the number of jobs in terms of that future growth. And it's, I think, just about 18,000 housing units and 47,000 jobs, if I can remember off the top of my head. Okay.
There was just one other question that was up above. From AS, is it possible to repeat preferences in downtown, Lindenville, El Camino Real areas, please? And yes, we'll get into that in more detail when we get to those sub areas.
And that voice is Billy Gross, planner for the city of South San Francisco. All right, and I see one last question, which is, have we set a goal for jobs housing balance? That's a great question, and I believe it was actually one of the questions that Ken asked in the preferred alternative workbook. The jobs housing balance of the growth projections is about 2.6, which is the current jobs housing balance within South San Francisco. But I just want to note with that jobs housing ratio, a lot of the non-residential development is already what you would call in the pipeline. Those are approved projects that have been approved over the last several years. But most of the housing would be new and not an approved project. So there's a lot of that kind of those office jobs that are in the kind of the pipeline for development already. And so we've popped open the poll results so you can kind of see what those are. So most of us, including myself, are 31 to 64, about half white and about a third Hispanic Latino. And then for location, it's kind of a mix of folks from all around the city. All right, I don't see any hands and I don't see any other questions. So I am going to move us on to the next section. If I can figure out how to do the technology. So before we get into the preferred land use alternative, I just wanted to remind everyone about the community vision for South San Francisco. So the vision for the general plan is really kind of the umbrella under which everything else falls within the general plan. It's kind of the idea is this is where we want to be in 2040. And so this vision statement really kind of recognizes where we want to be at that point in the future. So South San Francisco is a place where everyone can thrive. It's high quality of life, diverse and inclusive community, livable neighborhoods and excellent services, culture of innovation and environmental leadership ensure all people have equitable opportunities to reach their full potential. So we heard a lot of great things, especially over the last year, about what some of the values that people hold in South San Francisco are. When I think of values, I think about this as a little bit of the how we're going to implement the specific policies and actions of the general plan. We're going to do it with a lens of innovation. We're going to think forward. We're going to be progressive. We're going to do it sustainably. We're going to do it in ways that both have environmental benefits, but also social and economic sustainability as well. And we're going to do it equitably so that we pull and lift up all people within South San Francisco and not just a few. And we're going to do it in ways that are livable and make our community better overall and make it a better quality of life for everyone. So these are really the general plan guiding principles. So these really talk about how we shape the future of the city and the kind of the what we're trying to achieve in the general plan. We're really trying to achieve affordable, safe, amenity-rich neighborhoods that are affordable to a wide variety of households and people. We want to create both high quality and accessible services and facilities that meet the needs of all of the users in South City. And we want to create a safe and convenient transportation network that really prioritizes walking and biking and transit users. And we want to create a resilient community. We want to make sure that we're prepared for the potential impacts of climate change, while also being prepared for other shocks like we have seen in the last year, like the pandemic. And we want to create a vibrant downtown and prosperous economy. Really, these really talk about these 5 guiding principles are really where we want to go in the future. So now we're going to talk a little bit about that preferred alternative. So tonight, before we get to the specifics of the map, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the outcomes or the why of the alternative itself. So first of all, we heard a lot about wanting to make sure that we allow life sciences and biotech to continue to grow in the future. So the preferred land use plan allows those areas to both grow a little bit, but also to intensify. And by allowing them to intensify over time, it kind of allows this opportunity to retain land area for services, transportation, and industrial uses, both in the east of 101 area and then in the Lyndonville area as well. We heard a lot about creating and supporting housing for workforce housing, as well as affordable housing for folks within South San Francisco, all across the city. But particularly, we heard about a strong desire to create these kind of vibrant new mixed-use neighborhoods in Lyndonville and the east of 101 area. And then throughout the process, we heard about wanting to kind of retain the downtown as the heart of the community. That commercial strip along Grand Avenue and Linden Avenue, those are really kind of the heart of the community. We want to kind of lift that up and amplify it and improve those neighborhoods. But we also heard a lot about minimizing the land use change that happens within each of those neighborhoods. And we heard a lot both in all of those meetings about creating kind of transit-oriented communities near both the Caltrain station and the BART station. And those are not just about creating higher density land uses, but weaving in policies for affordable housing, for better mobility for pedestrians and cyclists. And with mobility, we heard a lot of great ideas about connecting in 101 in downtown and Lyndonville together, but also connecting across the El Camino corridor. So improvements in that network across the entire community. And then finally, I think we heard very, very strong support for really transforming Colma Creek into something special that can really be a distinct feature of South San Francisco. So something to kind of move the water and make sure that we're safe, but also to create those spaces for gathering, those opportunities for community and those opportunities for different types of mobility. So this is that land use map with the preferred land use plan. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit more detail, and I'm going to try and break it down as best I can. I want you all to be able to see it at this scale because I think you can start to see the different patterns of where the residential neighborhoods are and the kind of the yellows and the oranges, then where the biotech and life sciences are in those kind of brown, reddish browns, and where you get mix of uses with those purple colors, and where you get industrial uses, which are those kind of gray colors. And you'll see that kind of pattern of blue, which is public and institutional uses, and the green of the open spaces within the community. So you kind of see this pattern at the big scale, but it's a little hard to see. So I'm going to start to break it down at the citywide scale, and then we're going to zoom in to east of 101, to Lyndonville, downtown, and El Camino to talk about those areas specifically. So in the downtown area, what this map really shows is kind of maintaining that downtown station area specific plan, those designations and that zoning around Grand Avenue in the downtown area. So that really kind of reinforces, those designations reinforce Grand Avenue as that historic retail spine of the district with transit-oriented community near the Caltrain station, and then this pattern of feathered out residential neighborhoods from Grand Avenue. We also heard a lot about creating this neighborhood center here at Linden and Airport, and then allowing this to be a mixed use pattern all the way up to sister cities to kind of create that nice gateway from sister cities into the downtown area. And we also heard about creating this residential neighborhood around Colma Creek, really transforming this area, but making sure that we feather the density from the creek, which is a little bit higher, to a little bit lower as you get to downtown. So we kind of minimize some of those impacts on existing downtown residents. In the east of 101 area, you really see this strong purple hatch focus on this transit-oriented community right at that Caltrain station, with a lot the allowances kind of for higher density residential and mixed use and hotel in that purple south along Airport Boulevard. And we moved it south along along that corridor, but kind of framed it adjacent to Como Creek. So really kind of as we think about transforming the creek into a public amenity from the Bay Edge all the way through the city, we're thinking about how we can leverage that opportunity as a placemaking feature. In the darker kind of brown red, you can see that's that intensified life sciences and biotech uses. And then this gray is that kind of maintained industrial area in the southern part of east of 101 area. Here you can see the Lindenville area. So just to point out, this is again this kind of mixed use neighborhood along the creek. You've maintained a big chunk and core of industrial lands in the area and allowed it to kind of intensify over time to kind of change with market conditions, but then making sure to create sort of a buffer between the mixed use residential area along the creek and that industrial area further south. And then along the El Camino corridor, really thinking about these three centers along El Camino, at the BART station, at the Chestnut area here in the center, and then in the South Spruce area near the San Bruno BART, which is just off the map down here. It's really kind of creating these three kind of mixed use activity centers that have a mix of residential, retail, commercial uses, public spaces. You want to bring all that activity together. And then along the corridor, looking at opportunities to think about where we can add in residential uses, residential only uses, so particularly on the southern part of the corridor. Oops. And then finally, outside of those four areas, on the western side of the city, we looked at opportunities to add kind of housing and mixed use in other areas of the community. In particular, we looked at the Fox Ridge school site and the Sarah Vista school sites, which are both former school sites, and have those as residential with a park on them, as well as creating kind of a mixed use center at Westboro along the 280 in Westboro. This is just a sampling of what some of those residential uses would look like in different areas of the community. So I know it's a little hard and a little abstract for a lot of folks to kind of look at these different, this palette of kind of uses across the city and kind of understanding and think about what that looks and feels like. But these are examples of what that those residential uses look like across the city. Here's some sample pictures of what those commercial uses look like in the city. And then mixed use. So sometimes these are going to be a building that has maybe retail or service uses along the bottom floor and residential or office uses above it. Or sometimes it might be the two different uses set next to each other on the parcel. But again, you can see this kind of difference of these mixed use types across the city, and there's quite a lot of these across the city. And then finally on the map, you'll see a series of public uses. So these are things like the blue schools or the public buildings like City Hall, but also green things like parks and open space, as well as larger open spaces like Sign Hill. And so this map here shows from your current general plan to this preferred land use plan, what the changes in the land uses are. So anything that's shown as white hasn't changed. It's the same land use designation that's currently allowed in the city. And what's shown as in colors here are the designations in the areas that have changed in the general plan land use map. So this shows that you can see a lot of this is concentrated in the east of 101 area, in Lindenville, and then along the El Camino corridor. So this is our second point to pause and to answer questions. And we're going to throw up a poll question about the land use alternative itself to kind of get a sense of where people are feeling, how people are feeling about it right now. But if you have questions you want to ask, you are welcome to raise your hand in the participants window, or you are also able to just chat those questions to us and we will answer them. So Diana launched a poll just to kind of get a sense of what you think about the land use alternative itself. And we'll get an opportunity to talk in more detail, as I said, about the east of 101, Lindenville, downtown, and El Camino areas. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. We'll give you all a few more seconds to do the poll. Okay. Give you just a couple more seconds. We're not going to hold you to all these answers. You'll be learning more as we go and have more opportunities to provide direct feedback into the workbook in a few minutes. So why don't we end the poll? Thank you. So half of you thought it's all on the right track. A few of you, 20%, are on the fence. Several of you don't know, about 20% don't know, and about 10% are back to the drawing board. All right, so let's start there. I'll pull up some questions, but please feel free to raise your hand in the participant window and ask a question. Okay, so the first question I see in the chat is, I live right by the old school location in Winston-Salem, and I'm really happy to see the change to residential zoning. It's a perfect spot for development. Okay. From Shawnee, can you provide cross sections of various segments along Colma Creek and discuss building heights near the creek? So we are not at that level of detail at this moment in time. So as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at the general plan land use map. And so we're looking primarily at the use and the relative intensity of use. But as we get into the zoning phase of our work, we'll be able to look very specifically about those setbacks and how we think of the creek, how we set the buildings back, what the building heights are along that edge, what kind of frontage they have and character they have along the creek to create that amenity. So Catherine asked, what traffic studies have been done for these plans? Another good question. So when we developed the land use alternatives in the summer, we ran them all through a traffic model to kind of understand the general impacts of the land use alternatives and the growth allocations associated with them. And we presented those back in the summertime. In general, those alternatives showed that the improvements could help to maintain the vehicle miles traveled that the average person in South San Francisco would be doing on a daily basis, both as a resident of the city as well as an employee. But once we have defined the preferred alternative, it will actually go through an environmental impact review, and that will have a much more detailed assessment of the vehicle miles traveled associated with the project, as well as any needed improvements that there might be in terms of biking, walking, and roadway capacity. So there's a comment in the chat from Gita. On Colma Creek, the habitat value is not clear. Need setbacks and height limits for birds to use riparian area. It's a good comment. Mixed use doesn't give us much information about densities, heights, and proportion of commercial versus residential. Can you elaborate, please? So if you look in the preferred alternative workbook, there is a more detailed description of each of those different land use designations, and in particular those mixed use designations. It's a little hard to see on my screen, but it kind of gives you a sense of the proportion of commercial uses versus residential uses in general. And so it does vary by type and location of where those are within the community. And in general, again, we're not talking so much about the heights associated with it, although we will talk about them specifically on the El Camino corridor. But that is something that we'll be working through as part of the zoning regulations that we'll be developing in the future. I got another question from Geeta. Can we include a diagram that shows the effects of land use on sea level rise and flooding of Colma Creek and San Bruno Creek? Somewhat concerned that is not evident in the land use maps for resilience. It's a good comment, and we can do that in the future as well. I don't know if Diana or Billy saw any other comments or raised hands.
I do not.
Eric, there was one from a previous section. I don't know if you want to answer that now.
Could you read it, Suhaila? Thanks.
Oh, sorry, it's about East 101. Is flooding area taken into account in looking at new housing areas near Genentech?
In the East of 101 area? Part of what we're going to be doing during the next phase of work is looking specifically at what the strategies for sea level rise improvements are. The city is actually undergoing a number of projects and studies already, both along the Colma Creek corridor and along the shoreline. So I can't do it justice to do it off the top of my head, but that will be kind of part of that package of resilient strategies, particularly in the East of 101 area and in Lindenville. So there is potential flooding impacts in that area as well. And that will affect not just buildings and land, but also things like the Caltrain 101 corridor. So it's not just those buildings and properties in those areas, but also these major transportation and infrastructure assets that are not just important for South San Francisco, but for the entire region. And then I see one more comment or one more question in the chat. So although the focus is on land use with amenities for new residential development, is there consideration being given for land use for communities that are presently lacking services, for example, parks, youth services, recreational programs, and so forth? So thank you, Olga, for that comment. We have on some of the maps shown where some potential new open spaces are. And we talked a little bit about the community centers and facilities like in the downtown area, which we've sort of started to capture as part of those implementation activities, but we haven't necessarily ID'd a spot for those. All right, and they're coming in now. So I got one from Marshall. Tell us about the environmental impacts on the bay and habitat of the proposed bridge and raised road. So we'll be doing an environmental impact assessment report as part of this process, which will look at that specifically. But if a project like that is built, it will have its own environmental impact study associated with it to look at what those potential impacts are.
All right, there was one more. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, please.
There was one more above from Shani. Heights near Colma Creek must be considered prior to decisions on land use maps. Creek canyons with sheer building cliffs are not great for nature. Thank
you, Shani. And then from Geeta, we got pedestrian and bike green network is really possible post-COVID and important and needs to be read. And she dropped a link from the Sierra Club in the chat. All right, so I don't see any more. All right, so with that, we'll move on to the next area, which is the East of 101 area. So during the summer, during our engagement process through July and August, we heard a lot of stuff about city as a whole, but specifically about several of the sub areas, and we held a meeting in the East of 101 area. We heard about a very strong desire to create that residential neighborhood at the Caltrain station or near the Caltrain station. We heard a lot about wanting to really create housing that's affordable to a variety of incomes. And then we wanted to make sure that in particular, if adding housing in the East of 101 area, to ensure that it's appropriate, that the appropriate services and amenities are there to support residential employment growth. And so those are things like parks and open space, but also commercial services. So small retail, and there's other amenities. So people don't have to, say, get in their car and drive to a different part of the city to get those services for them. And then there's a strong desire really to kind of continue to encourage a mix of uses, of employment uses out in the East of 101 area. So not just biotech and life sciences, but also in industrial, emerging technologies, and other uses that might be appropriate in the area. And then a really strong desire to improve connectivity from the East of 101 area. I think I heard a number of times from a number of community members about how they never go to East of 101 unless they worked there. So they don't go there to access the open space or any of the other amenities that are in the area. So really, how do we improve that connectivity, and not just at the Caltrain station with those improvements, but other ways to get into the East of 101 area? And then a real strong desire to kind of create these opportunities for gathering and socialization. So new parks and new open spaces. How can we do that in the area? So we prepared a vision statement for the East of 101 area, and then reviewed it during those summer meetings. And this is a revised version of that statement. So East of 101 is a well-connected innovation district with a diverse mix of uses that serve as a model of sustainability, resilience, multimodal mobility, and economic opportunity. And I just want to stop for a second, because innovation district is a kind of a term of art, I would say. And it's really, what it really means when you step back is that we're creating a place that's just not one thing, that it's a kind of a mix, a vibrant mix of different uses that are all kind of pulled together in an area that includes both businesses and residential uses, but also maybe you think about bringing in institutional uses, those leading edge companies, and really you pull all that together in an amenity-rich and transit-rich area, which the East of 101 can be. And so under that vision is a series of sort of guiding policy. So this kind of flows out of that vision statement and what we heard. So to create that transit-oriented community, to preserve that cluster of life sciences while blending in other new emerging technologies, preserving industrial businesses in the area, making sure that the district is well connected, both through high quality transit, but also pedestrians and bikes in the district and then across the 101 corridor, and then creating really places and programming to inspire creativity. So just creating those wonderful places where people actually want to go and to be. And really thinking about how we can build in some flexibility for East of 101 to evolve over time. And I think the big kind of change that we're looking at here is sea level rise and the potential for climate disruption in the area. We also heard a significant amount about really wanting to connect people and nature to the bay and Colma Creek. So Colma Creek in particular really connects all the way through the city and can be that really great open space spine throughout South San Francisco. And then finally, really allowing the district, kind of the businesses who are already there to bring their creativity and ideas to really help solve some of the solutions and some of the issues that we have, whether it be traffic or climate change or other issues out in the district. So how can we think about those district scale solutions for East of 101? This is the preferred alternative and a little bit more zoomed in, so it's probably a little easier for everyone to see now at this scale than it was previously, but I'll go through this quickly. Really maintaining that area for life sciences, but allowing it to kind of intensify over time, in that darker brown. And then maintaining this and retaining this area south of East Grand Avenue for industrial uses, transportation, warehousing, service uses that are all prevalent in that area, but allowing it to change over time. So not just locking it into what it is right now, but giving it an opportunity to evolve with changing market conditions, allowing the building to be a little bit bigger to accommodate those changes over time, and then also providing an opportunity to make sure that as those properties change over time, they really start to think about the impacts of sea level rise within the district. And then really creating this mixed use transit-oriented community in this dark purple with hatch right here at the Caltrain station, and also this mixed use pattern south along Airport Boulevard, and really thinking about how we can create and connect Colma Creek and make it a great amenity for people who are living in the East of 101 area, but also throughout South San Francisco. This is an example of what some of that looks like. Some of those buildings might look like in the East of 101 area. And this area would have probably the highest scale of all those, meaning the tallest buildings, because it's East of 101. The heights have traditionally been allowed to be higher than in other parts of the city. And so we anticipate something similar in this area as well. So you can see some of what that looks like. And this is the change in those land use types. So on the left-hand side, you see the preferred land use map, and the right-hand side, you can see what those changes are in the land use. So we're going to stop there, and Diana's going to launch a poll. And first, we want to know what your thoughts are on the revised vision and guiding policy, which I'll flip back to. And then we're going to ask you kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, what you're feeling about the map itself. So let me go back to this. This is the vision statement. So I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. Okay, so we'll end that polling now. Whoops, sorry. I think I might accidentally turn it off for a second. So you can see in general, most folks agree with the revised vision and guiding policy. Some also neither agree nor disagree. Okay, and now we're going to launch a poll just to get your impression of the preferred land use map, and I'll come to this last slide so you can see the revised land use map as well as the change map, which again, in this area, there's a lot of change. So I'll give you another minute or so, or another few seconds to do the survey. Okay, so we're sharing the results now. So it seems like most people feel like about half the folks feel like it's on the right track. A few people feel like back to the drawing board, and about a quarter don't know. All right, so I'm going to open up the participants panel. If you have a question you'd like to ask about this area, I'm happy to answer it. There's a couple of comments in the chat, which I'll get to as well. So I'm going from the bottom, I apologize. from Jennifer, most of the East of 101 area shows change from current land use. It would be helpful to compare magnitude of change from existing conditions. Thank you, that's a good comment. And then this is a comment for Diana or Billy, if you can unmute Jasmine in this Spanish interpretation. And so what are the plans for public bay access and preservation of shoreline habitat? That's a great question. That's a very detailed set of questions that you're trying to get at. So it's almost another level of detail and thinking about what are those very specific connections and how they weave through the East of 101 area that are outside of, say, the Colma Creek corridor itself. And we've dashed some of the ones that we think would be appropriate based on kind of the network and connectivity pattern in the East of 101 area. You can see those in those green dashes. And then in terms of preservation of shoreline habitat, part of what we'll be doing and studying under the environmental review process is looking at what are the types of habitats that are out there along, particularly along, I think, the channels, those creek edges and along the bay edge, and looking at that as opportunities for protection and preservation of those species. So from Catherine, I like the idea of better use of that land, but concerned about traffic. That part of 101 already has tons of traffic, will probably become a permanent parking lot given the high density development for it. Thank you for your comment. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be doing more detailed transportation and traffic analysis of the land use plan. And then there was a question from Ken, but I want to lift it up. He asked about which is the Genentech area, and it is outlined in the blue dash here. You can see it here. And we have hand raised from Hermes. Maybe it's Hermes. If you'd like to, if we can unmute you and you can ask a question.
Yes, I joined a little bit late. I don't know if you explained about that dotted area between between the Sand-Trans area, north axis, connected to the South City Scavenger. That dotted black did you talk about that?
Right, this dotted arrow here from kind of that runs along here and then up into the East of 101 area.
Yes.
Is that right?
Please.
Thanks, it's a good question. I didn't talk about that. That's one of the many recommended improvements in the Mobility 2020 transportation plan. So that would be kind of an extension of the street and freeway here and into the 101 area, providing a different set of access into the district. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be doing an environmental impact analysis, but it'll be a high level. If this ever becomes a project, then it would have its own much more detailed analysis of its environmental impacts.
Thank you.
There's one more comment question from Geeta in the chat, which is there a plan for dedicated bike and pedestrian circulation pathways through 101 independent from roadways? Otherwise, biking does not increase significantly. So we've put some notional ideas of what some of those improvements might be on this map, but part of the East of 101 mobility plan also started to look at what some of those improvements might be. Those will be part of a more detailed kind of street, bike, and pedestrian map that will be part of the mobility element of the general plan itself. And then Lily asks, are the proposed CFD projects improvements incorporated into this plan? I think you're referring to the Mobility 2020 projects, and they are. So one more comment from Gita, which is how can we make this a win-win for the Bay and sea level rise as well as land use intensification? This is critical. So I think that's a really important thought that we can keep and hold as we continue working through these questions. So I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next area, which is Lindenville. So Lindenville is one of those really interesting and unique areas in South San Francisco, which I think has a really awesome opportunity to become something special and is unique to the city. We heard a lot about maintaining industrial uses, maintaining business diversity, but we also heard a lot about wanting to transform that area around Colma Creek into a vibrant mixed use and residential neighborhood. We heard a lot about wanting to emphasize kind of quality of life improvements. So if we are adding residential uses in that area, thinking about how we can have open space, places for gathering, places for people to meet in the district. And then finally, we heard a lot, because it's on the edge of the downtown area, about considering the impacts of future growth on the area. So this is the revised vision statement and guiding policy based on what we heard from the community back in the summer. So Lindenville is a vibrant and inclusive neighborhood that maintains a base of good paying jobs, promotes the creative economy, and creates a new residential neighborhood where all people can thrive. So specifically with the policy, sort of creating that new residential neighborhood that provides a range of different housing types, preserving a core of industrial area, really proactively supporting the arts and artists in this area, both here and then in the downtown area, and constructing new and safe pedestrian and cyclist facilities in particular from the downtown area into the Lindenville area and east of 1 end, and then El Camino and Orange Park. And then, as we've talked about before, kind of really transforming Colma Creek. So this is that map of the land use change. So you can see here this kind of residential mixed use neighborhood in purple, kind of focused here along Colma Creek with improvements there and new parks along the creek. We've maintained a large area kind of industrial uses here as part of the Lindenville area, but like the east of 101 area, allowed it to kind of transition and change over time into a little bit more of an intensive industrial use. And then thinking about this kind of buffer edge, right? So making sure that there's some buffer between that kind of that vibrant neighborhood along the creek and then the industrial area to the south. So what does that look like in between with some mix of commercial spaces, industrial spaces, residential uses, opportunities for things like the arts and artists being in that area. And then really allowing some residential uses here along the 101 corridor here, requiring some of those to be residential uses, and then kind of creating a mixed use corridor along South Spruce Avenue down to here, this is El Camino here, and this is that Safeway shopping center here in the San Bruno BART station. Here's here right off the map. So this is what those uses look like. Just kind of give you a sense of what it looks and feels like. And so this is that preferred alternative map on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, you can see where those changes are. And again, you can see in this area, like in the east of 101 area, some significant changes in the land uses. So I'm going to stop there and we'll launch a poll to talk about that vision first, the vision and guiding policy, to get your take on it, and then we'll come back and look at the map. So if you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat for us. Okay, we'll give everyone a few more seconds. Okay, go ahead and share the results. So a bit over half of you either agree or strongly agree, and then about half of you neither agree nor disagree. And then we're going to show the map, and we'll launch a poll just to kind of get your quick take on whether you agree with updated land use direction for this area. And then if you have a question, I see Olga has her hand raised.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Is it possible to pause the presentation? The Spanish speakers are having a difficult time. They say that they can't hear the presentation.
Absolutely.
Yes, one moment, please. Let me verify.
Okay, thanks, Olga.
I missed the presentation because I was trying to take care of them. Hold on for just 1 second, please. Thank you. Yes, we're on. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. All right, so we're gonna end the poll now. I'll give you 10 more seconds. Nope. So about half feel like it's on the right track and about a quarter are on the fence. Okay. I'm just curious if anyone wants to raise their hand and say why they're either on the fence or neither agree nor disagree with the vision for Lyndonville. See if anybody wants to raise their hand. We have just one comment in the chat, which is from Gita, which says it's hard to tell how big the changes are, so hard to respond. And Shani says need cross sections. Gita, go ahead. You have your hand up.
I just do want to emphasize that I really like the graphics, but it is hard when you ask us, do you like the preferred alternative and the changes? It's hard to know because it's hard to tell from the diagrams how significant the changes are. We can tell there's changes, but we can't tell what the change is.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay, thanks, Gita.
That's, it's just a difficult poll at that point.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments or questions? From Mary, we got I'm not a resident, so don't feel knowledgeable enough to answer, but I'm interested in sea level rise impact on these plans, the bay, the shoreline, and animals. From Catherine, with high density development, my main concerns are private parking, public parking, and traffic, which won't be addressed till later. And from Jennifer, agree with Gita, impossible to appreciate impacts without greater detail about density of use. So again, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we'll be pausing to kind of go to an online survey with the preferred alternative workbooks, which talks about specifically about those densities of uses in them. And from Shani, not enough parkland. Shani, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just look, you have a lot of residential density and I don't see a lot of parkland here. And so that's of concern to me. The only thing they have looks like is a couple of small tiny parks in the creek corridor, which should actually be much wider, and that I would hope would be part of this, that you can use various tools that your group has used before to create a wider corridor and more parkland.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks for that comment, Shani. We have one more comment. It looks like one more comment in the chat about what are the plans to connect Lindenville to east of 101. There's a couple of different things that you can see on the map. The first is the connection via the transformed Tacoma Creek. So that would be more of a bike and pedestrian connection. But also there is this Utah Bridge here. So an additional change in additional capacity added in crossing the 101 corridor. And then from Geeta, so I'm really worried that sea level rise is not reflected in these diagrams, as we are going to raise expectations and only make it even more difficult to build in resilience. The creeks need setbacks and for resilience, and more resilience space needed near the bay. From Gabe, are there any changes proposed in the Country Club Park area on the general plan? The answer is no, and we'll talk about the El Camino area in a minute. And then from Nicole, there is also a high prevalence of people who are visually impaired and who use wheelchairs, while a small percentage of the population. It's important to be mindful of safe access beyond ADA so that everyone can take part and fully enjoy these new developments. Thank you for your comment, Nicole. Okay. All right, so I'm going to just be mindful of time because I have two more areas to go through. So we're going to talk about downtown and the El Camino corridor. Next. So the downtown area, we held two community meetings back in the summer, both one in English and then one in Spanish. And this is a little bit of what we heard. I mean, we heard a lot of things, but this is just a distillation of some of the things we heard. We heard about celebrating the history, culture, and arts and diversity of the downtown. Desire to really maintain small, culturally diverse businesses along Grand Avenue and Linden Avenue. We heard about protecting existing residents and businesses. We also heard a lot about improving bicycle, pedestrian, and public transportation networks, both within the downtown and to the downtown area. We heard a lot about sort of limiting land use change within the area. Particularly, there's been a lot of development within the downtown over the last handful of years, and there's concern about gentrification and displacement in the area. And then there's a desire then to distribute some of that other high density housing and mixed use in other parts of the city. And there was a very strong desire to create new places for recreation and gathering in the downtown. And this is one of, as many of you know, probably one of the more underserved neighborhoods from a parks perspective. So we went back to the drawing board with the vision statement, and this is the revised version of that vision statement. So I'm going to read it out loud. Downtown is home and gathering place to people of different income levels, races, and ethnicities. It is a center of art and culture, small business, housing, and transit that embrace the entire community. It celebrates the culture and history of the downtown and its residents. New growth is balanced with policy, action, and investment to protect vulnerable residents, homes, and businesses from displacement, allowing them to sustain roots in the community. New community gathering spaces provide opportunities for existing and new residents to connect and interact. That vision statement is supported by a series of guiding policies, things around celebrating the history and culture of that downtown, retaining existing and local businesses, as well as protecting some of that historic building and fabric, promoting new residential, mixed use, and employment uses to add new patrons to the downtown area, and then really focusing improvements in the streetscape and ped and bike along Grand Avenue, creating new open space and amenities in the area, protecting residents and businesses from displacement, and that making sure that the growth that happens within the downtown and surrounding areas really helps to advance other important goals and characteristics of the downtown area. This is the kind of the preferred alternative for the downtown area. it sort of maintains, as I mentioned before, it really maintains that community vision for downtown as the heart of South San Francisco, and retains the core community land use vision articulated in the downtown station area specific plan with a few adjustments, really creating that mixed use neighborhood here south along Railroad Avenue and to the creek, but then also allowing kind of creating this neighborhood center here at Linden and Airport, and then creating this mixed use boulevard into the downtown area, really to create that gateway from sister cities down into the downtown area. This gives you a sense of kind of the look and feel of some of that, of these areas. And this map on the left, again, shows that preferred alternative in all of its colors. And on the right, you can see the areas that are changes. So again, in the downtown, we largely heard from the community that there was not a strong desire to have many land use changes in the downtown. So really they're focused here, this neighborhood center at Linden and Airport, and then this kind of gateway into the downtown area with the addition of a park in the northern section. So with that, I'm going to pause, and then we can launch a poll about the vision and guiding policy for the area. So I'll go back to that now. Okay, we'll give you just another few seconds. Okay, go ahead and end the poll. So people tended to agree or strongly agree with the vision, and about a third of the folks neither agreed nor strongly agreed. And then here is the map and the changes map. So maybe we just launch this poll quickly, Diana. And so if you have questions that you want to drop in the chat, feel free to go ahead and do that now. Or comments, you can drop it in the chat or raise your hand.
We have a comment in the chat, and we also have Hermes with his hand raised. Which one would you like to start with, Eric?
Go ahead, Hermes. Okay, well, he's unmuting or being unmuted. Shani suggested the downtown vision include an urban forest, and then Gita recommends a specific community benefit category for downtown to provide subsidized rental space for community space and small local businesses. Right?
And you can go ahead, Hermes.
Yes, Eric, I noticed that the park area is highlighted in the old town. How about the community center? Is that already so highlighted in the same area?
There, you'll see that we've talked about it as part of the preferred alternative workbook for the area, because that was one of the strong comments that we heard. But we haven't really identified a specific location for that. That requires its own sort of detailed study and planning within this area.
I would like to highlight it that we only have a limited space available. I hope we can choose what we have right now. If we wait too late, it'll be gone. And I'm afraid that, you know, we don't want to get to that point. I would like to strongly suggest that we can What else can we do to actually put it in the map? Because this is our opportunity. We don't do it now, it'll be hard to add it later. To be more specific, right next to the park that you highlighted is the only available area. We do not have another area.
Great, thank you. So you can see it about a little over half say it's on the right track, and about a third say they're on the fence. Gita likes the idea for trees to plan for urban forests. It'll bring cooling and birds. I'm not seeing any other hands and not a lot of chat. So I'm going to go on to the last area, and then we're going to do the survey. All right, so this is El Camino, is the last area we're going to talk about this evening. So we heard a number of different things, but to really create those 3 distinct mixed-use areas, to really allow higher intensities near the South San Francisco BART station, and to find more opportunities for housing along the corridor. There's a strong desire to find more space for parks and open space. And then really to transform El Camino, not just from a thoroughfare into, or a thoroughfare for cars, into something that's a more complete mixed street that allows better facilities for biking, walking, as well as transit. We heard a lot about maintaining the general plan designations for the Country Club Park and not changing that designation. And then, as many people noted, there's been a number of plans along El Camino over the years, and there's a real strong desire to see the vision of those become a reality. So this is the revised vision and guiding policy for the El Camino area, really to create a dynamic and re-envisioned boulevard that is safe and healthy place for transit, riders, pedestrians, cyclists, with a diverse mix of commercial, residential, and open space uses. The guiding policy really falls into the kind of these 4 main ideas of improving travel along and across the El Camino corridor, providing a range of housing types for different income levels, and creating kind of transit-oriented pedestrian mixed-use, creating pedestrian-oriented mixed-use centers, kind of with the clusters of activity. So really concentrating activity at a few spots along the corridor, and then making sure that there's good visual transitions and improvements from connectivity across the neighborhoods. Okay, so I personally find the El Camino corridor to be the most complicated to really think about and understand in many ways, because it's sort of a narrow corridor that runs through the city and has a number of plans that are already in place for the corridor. So before I get to the map, I thought I would just try to do something simple, which is kind of break it down in a way that's a little clear, to think about the corridor itself as not just one uniform corridor, but a series of smaller little districts along the corridor to kind of really help understand what's happening on the corridor. So as we've talked about a number of times, really creating these 3 sort of nodes of activity. So this is the South San Francisco BART station, this is Chestnut area, and then this is the Spruce and El Camino area, which is pretty close to the San Bruno BART station, which is just off the map. So those are your areas of focus, right? So there's areas of activity where we want to capture as much of that activity as we can, right? So you want to focus your things like open spaces, retail and amenities, all in these areas and these kind of active nodes along the corridor. So then you have your community civic campus. It really is right here adjacent to the Chestnut area kind of activity. So they kind of overlap with each other. So it's really part of that district, but a really important civic feature along the district. And then you kind of have a healthcare district, right? So you have Kaiser Permanente here and some medical and office uses right around it. So really you kind of have this district that's really focused on those areas. And then sort of in between. So what happens in between and kind of north of it? So you have these opportunities to think about, okay, well, these may be more discrete areas, maybe mixed use, but maybe with a more of a focus on housing in those particular areas. So for me, this diagram kind of helps break up the corridor because it's a complicated corridor with a lot of things happening along it. So here's what that map looks like for the El Camino corridor. Again, you kind of have this mixed use center at Bart, Chestnut, and down here at Spruce. You kind of have this residential focus here along the southern portion of El Camino. You have your kind of your healthcare district here next to your civic center here. This is a little bit of what that would look and feel like. So this one has a variety of different types of mixed use along it. So again, those could be kind of what we call vertical mixed use, where you have retail along the ground floor and residential or office above it, or they could be horizontal. So you have some commercial uses on the same site as residential uses. And so this map shows that preferred land use map on the left-hand side. And so some of those changes on the right-hand side. Now, this one is a little bit more complicated than other areas, as I mentioned, because there's a number of plans that are already in place for this area. So you're going to have to go into a little bit more detail about what's happening here on the corridor. So here in the northern area, we heard a lot about wanting to add more housing near the South San Francisco BART station. So we've increased the density right around the BART station here. We've also found some new opportunities for where you could have mixed use with housing here at Hickey and the shopping center there. Further south along the corridor, you can see we're allowing a little bit higher residential density, kind of from the Chestnut area south all the way down to the Spruce mixed use center here, which allows higher densities here, but then also creates new opportunities. So areas that are currently zoned as commercial uses could be residential in the future. And then specifically one area along the corridor, this area here allows up to 120 or 160 feet, depending on the specific parcel. This is from the Chestnut area plan. And so we're also recommending that to maintain those residential densities that are allowed there, but to reduce the heights to 85 feet to be consistent with what's happening in the other areas along El Camino, but also within the downtown area. Just making sure that those densities and the heights are aligned. So again, not reducing those densities, but kind of dropping those heights a little bit, just specifically within this area. So this again is that preferred alternative with those changes. So I'm going to go back to the vision statement and those guiding policies to see if you have any comment or have any, what you think about those. If you want to launch the poll, we'll give you just a few minutes to do that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the polling, and it seems like most people either agree or strongly agree with the revised vision. Now I'm going to scoot forward to the map itself. So if you could launch the poll about the map, and then I see there's a few chats popping up, which I'll pull up. And if you have a question that you want to ask, if you want to raise your hand. And then after this, this is the last pause, and then we're going to have you all, I'm going to show you the online survey and workbook, and we're going to have you guys work on that for a little while this evening. All right, so let's see. So the orange high density development near Hickey Boulevard, there's a mobile home park there now called Treasure Island. Does that belong land belong to the city or is it private land? That would be private land. From Marshall, will all the new residential areas have groceries and restaurants within walking distance? So I think the idea is that we kind of congregate those mix of commercial uses in those centers. So at South Spruce, at Chestnut, and then near the BART station. So you can get them all kind of in there with some interspersed throughout. So you can see from the polling, about half of you said it's on the right track. Several of you are on the fence, and several of you don't know. All right, let's see. From Geeta, we have one more comment. It looks like, aren't there some protections for affordable housing like mobile home parks? There are, and so there's very specific state law around mobile home parks. And specifically, there's requirements to replace, in particular, a lot of the what you would call naturally occurring affordable housing that exists in those mobile homes. Okay, I don't see any more hands, no more chats. Oh, one more from Catherine. Do we know how many parking spaces will be eliminated from BART if we develop around there? We wouldn't know the answer to that question. I know in the East Bay, I can speak to the experience here in the East Bay, I live in Oakland, that they typically have a one-to-one replacement policy for their parking. So if they're going to remove something like a service parking lot, they put it into a parking structure and replace it. All right, and then one last comment I see in the chat, and then I'm going to move us on. So mobile home parks often produce more low-income housing than multi-story replacements. So we should keep this in mind. Okay, so now we want to hear from you guys. So I'm going to flip ahead. So there's a number of other ways to engage in this. So this has been sort of me talking at you, mostly focused on kind of a learning session and education tonight to kind of gather your comments and questions. But now we want to have an opportunity to hear from you. There's upcoming sessions with Planning Commission on the 22nd and then City Council on November 18th around the preferred land use alternative. And then there's other ways to engage through the Shape SSF website and an online survey there, as well as an Ask a Planner session. So those are virtual office hours every Tuesday, starting on October 20th, which was today at lunchtime. So first of all, we have this really cool and fun and interactive online survey. It is a preferred alternative workbook, and you can comment in that workbook, and it includes the vision and guiding principles, the preferred land use alternatives, and then these policies and implementation actions for future that we study in more detail in the future. We ask that you respond to the survey by November the 6th, which is, I think, 2 weeks away. So this is what that online survey looks like. Once you get to the ShapeSSF.net website and go to Preferred Alternative tab up here, you can scroll down the page and you'll see this embedded in there. You can zoom in and zoom out of the document. You can flip the pages. You can do a keyword search, and you can comment. So you can drop a comment bubble into the comments. So you can click anywhere in the document. You have put your name in and add your comment. Tell them you're not a robot. And then you can comment on other people's comments. So if you like something that someone else has said, you can just thumbs up their comment. If you don't like it, you can thumbs down their comment. So it's another way to kind of interactively engage with one another. So now I'm going to pause and stop sharing my screen in just a second. And Diana, I believe, has dropped the links into the chat for each of you. So we're going to take, we're running a little bit late. We're going to take 15 or 20 minutes to kind of pause and allow you to work on the online survey yourself, to pull it up and to start doing some of the commenting. And then after that 15 minutes or so, we're gonna kind of talk a little bit about what we're seeing from some of the comments that you have in that preferred alternative workbook. So we'll do a little report back. So with that, I'm gonna stop talking, and I would direct you to shapessf.com/preferred alternative that Diana has again dropped in the chat, both in English and Spanish, for you to take a look at preferred alternative workbook and start commenting. And we're going to pause, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes to do a report back. Thanks.
And let us know if you have any questions about using this Conveo document. I've made it so you can add your name and email if you'd like, but you don't have to. They can also be anonymous comments.
Thanks for the comment, Olga, about it being complicated to complete the survey. Diana, maybe you could help, if you can, help with getting people oriented to the survey. Thank you.
Sure. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so I can share it on my end?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So on shapessf.com, when you click on that link that we sent you, if you scroll down, there's an English section. And for those who are English speakers, you can click and directly add comments. And for those who are Spanish speakers, if you scroll down a little bit more, here's the Spanish section. and you can scroll and select on any area and add a comment. And so for this, it always gets you to verify that you're not a robot. And I know sometimes there's a bus. And that's how you add the comment. And also for those who still are not as comfortable, you can also send me an email. And I'm going to put my email into the chat.
And Diana, would you mind saying what you just said in Spanish, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ok, para los que hablan español, les mandé el enlace en el chat de esta junta, y si van a shapessf.com preferred alternative y les mandé el enlace, pueden bajar en la página y primero van a ver el documento en español, pero si siguen bajando van a ver el documento en inglés, y si siguen bajando van a ver el documento en español. Y este documento pueden hacer clic en cualquier lugar, y si quieren pueden poner su nombre y también su correo electrónico, pero no es necesario. En cualquier área que quieran poner comentario, pueden escribir lo que creen, si algo le gusta, si no le gusta, y después pueden puchar este botón. No, espera. Oh, sí. Tienen que asegurarse que no son robots. Y lo siento, ya estoy procesando porque es difícil para algunos de ustedes, porque esta opción para asegurar que no son robots, solo nos dan la opción de tener el texto en inglés, y cada vez es algo diferente. Pero lo que sí he notado es que a veces sí les pregunta y a veces no. Pero si pueden hacer eso, después pueden puchar el botón azul y ahí les va el comentario. Pero también si todavía es muy difícil y no pueden, me pueden mandar un correo electrónico directamente a mí. Ya puse mi correo electrónico en el chat. Es Diana RAIMIASSOCIATES.com. Y también pueden mandar comentarios también directamente en nuestro sitio de web, shapessf.com, para dar comentarios. Oh, y para los que hablan español, si quieren solo escribir sus comentarios, pueden hacer eso, o también pueden enviar, que aquí tienen la opción de bajar este documento y después pueden escribir directamente en el documento. Yo también acepto eso.
So I'm seeing people are in the document adding in comments, which is terrific. We'll give you guys all, let's call it 10 more minutes to do this. And this survey, as we said, closes on November the 6th. So you have more time to continue working on it, but we'll do a quick wrap up and kind of summarize what we're seeing in some of the comments in just about 10 minutes. So I'll give you guys all till 8:05. So just to give everyone a 5-minute warning. I see people are dropping off, so we'll give everyone just a couple more minutes and then we'll do a quick report back and then we'll wrap for the evening. We should be done by 8:10 for those who are still on. All right. So the way that we're going to do this is we are going to have different members of the team. You've heard me talk enough for the evening. We're going to have different members of our team kind of synthesize what they're seeing in the comments in the preferred alternative workbook for different areas of the city. So Billy Gross is going to start us off with a little bit of a summary about what people are saying in the on the citywide, and then Diana is going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in downtown. Lisa is going to talk a little bit about east of 101, Tony, Lindenville, and then Megan, the El Camino portion. So we're just going to spend just a minute or two just highlighting what we're seeing in some of the comments for these different areas. And with that, I'll just hand it over to Billy.
Yeah, and in looking at the documents, the majority of the comments that are the citywide related are to do with the policies and implementation actions that we're doing for future study. So comments on definitely looking at sea level rise, how do we deal with Colma Creek and potentially making it a green space, having more integrated green infrastructure, urban forest plan. From a housing perspective, wanting to see more of an emphasis on affordable housing that builds residents' equity, and how do we make sure that the housing that we were putting in is not in areas where it could be an impact for sea level rise. From a mobility standpoint, COVID-related comments on how do we make sure that this new working from home is able to continue even when with the growth. It might be a thing that helps us to better manage traffic and some of those types of issues. And then from a land use and placemaking standpoint, just referring to the Colma Creek could be a gem, and we agree, like, depending on how that is developed in the future, that could be a great amenity for the city. So I think that's enough of the citywide comments.
Thank you, Billy. And as you can see, we already have a few comments, even on the map. And so when we go on to the downtown area, We had a few comments on the map. I know that Olga was concerned that she didn't see the green dot at Cypress Park as she did on previous presentation maps. And so Cypress Park is still here in the original preferred alternative map. What we tried to do when we showed changes only was just to show any instances of new proposed parks so as not to cause as much confusion. And then I believe there was one more comment. Nope, no other comments so far. Okay, but that was it so far for this section. And then Tony, would you like to go for Lindenville?
Absolutely. Hey team, thanks for joining. No comments that I can find on the Lindenville section. Oh, you found one. Oh, by my buddy Ken. Hey Ken. Will the Coma Creek plan include reestablishing marshes for flood control and habitat restoration? Will public access for parks be included? How will sea level rise be handled? Oh, these are all great questions. We actually have a third-party consultant, Hassel, that is pursuing a grant right now to actually evaluate all of Coma Creek and how to make it this fabulous reintegrated wetlands that we can use as a sort of incredible resource for the city. And I think all of these questions we're going to try and address. It's not going to happen just yet, but sort of at the 10,000 foot level, we've evaluated this is a special, a special amenity that we want to try and develop. And I think it's going to evolve over the next 12 to 18 months. Do you see any other comments? Because I missed that one. And I didn't see any other. Well, thank you.
All right, Lisa for East of 101.
Good evening. I do not see any comments on East of 101. I know it's a bit far down, so maybe people needed some more time. You can certainly save that link and go back to it later, and please provide us some comments. We would really like to capture those.
Yes, and then Megan for El Camino.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Hey. Okay, there were two comments about El Camino, a long document, so perhaps people didn't make it that far. There was some concern about traffic near the intersection of El Camino. Again, as we discussed in the chat earlier, this is where proposed land use change to high density residential at the existing mobile home site. There was also a comment in support of the upzoning areas around BART stations. And the commenter also commented on the parking lot in front of the South San Francisco BART station. He said, oh, you pulled it up. He said that if the parking lot in front of the SSF BART station is an opportunity site, it should be included in the preferred land use alternative. If so, the topic of parking reduction would need to be addressed. So perhaps, or maybe Billy can address if that site is an opportunity site.
Thank you. And I also went through the Spanish one about 3 minutes ago, and as Olga had stated, folks were having trouble, so I didn't see any comments, but I'm going to continue tracking. Voy a continuar chequeando si recibimos comentarios en la encuesta en español, pero también voy a esperar para recibir comentarios en mi correo electrónico. So I'll also be expecting emails so we can collect that feedback. And I think that's it, Eric.
Thanks, Anna. All right, you want to stop sharing your screen for just a second, and I'm going to share mine for the last minute, and then I'll let you guys all go. So just first of all, I want to just thank everyone for coming tonight. I think obviously this is a very complicated and detailed set of information to kind of go through on the fly. So that's why there are other ways to continue engaging in the conversation. So we'll be at upcoming meetings with City Council and Planning Commission here, as you can see, on October 22nd and November 18th. But then we encourage you to continue commenting on the Preferred Alternatives workbook. So that online survey, and if you have questions, feel free to just drop in for an informal Ask SSF Planner virtual office hours on Tuesdays at noon. And then finally, for more information about the project, go to shapessf.net for more information, and feel free to contact Lisa Costa-Sanders, who's the project administrator for the city. So again, just a big thank you for all coming out this evening, and we look forward to hearing more from you all in this process and getting any other thoughts and ideas that you have. So thanks everyone, and have a good evening.